Okay, looks like we're live and ready to go. As you guys can see from behind me, overlooking the initial morning sunrise in Yerushalayim Era Kodesh, which is coming up right behind me. Nothing else I'd rather be doing 6 o'clock in the morning, but this is the best thing in the world. So, in the best place in the world on Erev Yontif. So, let's learn a little bit of Torah together. First of all, just thank you to all the people that put in a lot of effort to make this happen. Rabbi Lubowitz, Rabbi Benovitz for constantly helping us, trying to make us reunite the Kollel, bring everybody back together, especially for with regards to learning ideas. Second of all, to Nachi Cooper and Zev, who are Nachi Cooper and Zev Kahana, who are always involved, with everything, every aspect that goes on during the summer, after the summer, mostly, really a lot of time after the summer, and a lot of details go into everything they do. So certainly Nachi, certainly Zev are big factors. Secondly, I want to dedicate tonight's shir to the Full Shlema of Orly Bas Esther, who is a NCSYer from the southeast region of NCSY. She's from Jacksonville. She was walking home with her mother from shul on Friday night and was unfortunately hit by a car. Her mother was killed, and she suffered with severe injuries. But Baruch Hashem, she's alive and doing well, and we should continue to daven and learn, certainly for the refuah shlema of Orly Bas Esther. Second of all, I just want to remind everybody about the upcoming events, the upcoming NCSY Kollel events. We obviously have the DRS Simchas Torah event going on next week in DRS. It's going to be awesome. A lot of guys are going, a lot of Madrichim. Rabbi Kamenetsky is going to be back in America for that, and it's going to be great. As well as registration, which is pretty scary considering today's only September 17th, but registration's here and ready. So for those of you that have decided that you want to spend next summer in Beit Meir with us, please register, whether that's as staff or as a camper. All of those things are currently up and running, so the faster you get your registration in, the faster the summer will ultimately come around. That rounds it up for announcements. We're not going to, as most of you that are NCSYers can hear, for most of you guys, announcements are much longer, so we are going to get started here. So we're just going to discuss a little bit about the idea of shaking the Lulav. What is the ikar component of the Mitzvah of Lulav? Whether it's that of the Netila, just the picking up of the Lulav, or it's that of the Nanuum, the shaking of the Lulav. Now, if you look at the Sukkos, the Sukkos starts in Parshas Emor, Sefer Vayikra, Parachav Gimel, Pasuk Mem. The first source on the source sheets on the NCSY website. And the Pasuk tells us, Ulakachtem lachem b'yom harishon pri tzadar kapos tamarim v'anaf itz avos v'arvi nachal usmachtem ufnei Hashem Elokeichem shivas yamim. That there is a mitzvah d'oraisa to shake the lulav, to take the lulav, ulakachtem, to take the word, the lashon of lakach. This, and then the pasuk tells us the 4 different meaning that we have over here, and then the pasuk continues, "Smachtem l'fnei Hashem Elokeichem shivas yamim." So here we have a mitzvah d'oraisa of taking daled minim, a mitzvah d'oraisa to whatever that means, whatever that word means, which was what we're going to try to discuss today. To take daled minim and to be misameach l'fnei Hashem Elokeichem shivas yamim, which means there's a mitzvah, an added mitzvah in the times of the Beis Hamikdash that we're going to take the shivas yamim, the arba minim, for 7 days. So, what are the parameters of this mitzvah? Even furthermore, we see the Gemara in Sukkah, the next source, the Gemara in Sukkah, Daf Mem Aleph Amud Aleph. A lot of these Makoros that you're going to see were, for those of you that were at least in Kollel this past summer, you might have seen already over the course of the summer when we learned the Sechet Sukkah together. But the next Gemara tells us, Mishachar Beis HaMikdash, Hiskin Rabbi Yochanan et Zakkai, Shehi Lulav Nital B'Medina, Shiva Zecher LeMikdash. That once the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai enacted, he made a takana, that we are going to take the lulav outside of the Beis HaMikdash in what we call the Gvulin for 7 days. So we know we have this mitzvah of Lulav for 7 days. We know that we every single day we wake up, we do the Hoshanos, we do the Nanuum, we make brachos on the Lulav and Esrog. However, what is the Iker mitzvah? What is the main component of the mitzvah? And what is that of the Tosefes mitzvah? What are we adding on? What's an extra component? So we're going to hopefully try to discuss this today a little bit and get some understanding as to how this is, how this plays out, this sugya plays out, about whether or not one needs to do the shaking of the lulav itself, or simply just picking up the daled minim is good enough. So the sugya starts really once we see the deoraisa. The Gemara starts off in the Gemara in Sukkos Mem Beis Amud Aleph. The Gemara says, the Gemara there is talking about a case of what we call in halacha when somebody's ta bidvar mitzvah. When somebody decides that they're going to pick up the lulav in their rishus hayachid, in their house, in their private domain, and they're going to walk out now to the rishus harabim. So the Gemara tells us in that context that we have this concept of dvar mitzvah. We have a concept that whenever anybody does a mitzvah, if they were to make a mistake in doing a mitzvah and they ended up doing an avera, there are different consequences for what is to occur, and we have this concept of tab dvar mitzvah when somebody makes a mistake with regards to a dvar mitzvah. So the Gemara says over there on Mem Beis Amud Aleph, a very famous Gemara in the area of the mitzvah of lulav and esrog. The Gemara tells us mida'agbe nafakbe, that when one does hagba on the lulav, when one picks up the lulav, nafakbe, that they're yotzei the mitzvah of netilas lulav, that they have now fulfilled their obligation of lulav. So therefore, the Gemara says it's not a case of ta'ab dvar mitzvah. It's not a case where one messed up with regards to doing a mitzvah, because the mitzvah was already done. Mida'agbe nafakbe, right when the guy picked up the lulav, that's the end of the mitzvah. So here we see that mida'agbe nafakbe is the ikr mitzvah, that all one has to do to be mekayim the mitzvah of netilas lulav is to pick up the lulav, and once one does that, one is mekayim the mitzvah, certainly on a deoraisa level. And we're going to try and understand, is it inclusive or exclusive? Meaning, is there something extra that has to be done? Is there a hemshich of the mitzvah, continuation of the mitzvah perhaps? Or is once the ikr mitzvah is done, are we in good shape? So Halachic has a very interesting diuk in the Rambam that we see in source 4. The Rav says as follows. The Rambam writes, Misha yagbia arba minim elu, bein sheikbian ke'achas, bein vazeh acher zeh, bein b'yamin, bein b'smol yatza. Regardless of how you pick up the lulav and esrog, with regardless of what hand you pick it up in, you're going to be yotzei. And then if you just look at the bolded words, the Rambam writes, U'mitzvah kil chasa. He says, I'm going to tell you now what the mitzvah is in its fullest sense of the word. What is the mitzvah kil chasa? So the Rambam writes, mitzvah kil chasa, what's the mitzvah? She'yagbia aguda shal shlosha minim biyamin. So you pick up the 3 minim in the yamin. Obviously those are referring to those 3 minim that come together, the lulav, the hadassim, and the aravos. The etrog b'smol, and then you pick up the etrog with your left hand. V'yolich, v'yavi, v'yolev, v'yored, and you extend it and you bring it back and you pick it up and you bring it down. V'ya'aneya halulav shalosha ba'amim b'chol ruach u'ruach. So the Rambam writes that you're supposed to shake the lulav in every single direction. So when the Rambam writes, I'm going to tell you the mitzvah kil chasa, I'm going to tell you the entire mitzvah, and then the Rambam discusses what the Nanuum are, what the shakings of the lulav are. Seemingly, the Rav makes a diuk from this Rambam. The Rav makes a very interesting observation from this Rambam, that what's going on here, that the mitzvah kil chasa, the way to be mekayim the mitzvah in its fullest sense, is through doing the Nanuum, shaking the lulav, whether it's molich umevi, shaking it to the back, shaking it to the right, shaking it in front, whatever you're doing, that's the mitzvah kil chasa. So that's what we should try to do. So we have a very interesting understanding over here of what the mitzvah is. The Rambam seems to understand that the mitzvah kil chasa, the main idea, the main focus, the main component, the main objective of the mitzvah is that of, obviously including the ulikachtem, that is of the Nanuum, the shaking of the lulav, whether it's forwards or backwards, right or left. And the Gemara seems to just say, mida'agbe nafakbe, that when you pick up that lulav, you are yotzei, you are mekayim the entire mitzvah. Okay, good. So that's our premise. Those are our 2 statements that we're going to ultimately be working with, and we're going to see many practical implications for this chakira about what the ikr mitzvah is, what the main component of the mitzvah is, and what the tosefes, what the additional aspects of this mitzvah are. Okay, so here we go. So the Brusker Rav brings a couple of rayas here, a couple of proofs here, to try and prove that, the Rav Soloveitchik's diuk, well, really Rav Soloveitchik is trying to prove that the Brusker Rav's diuk is correct, as just chronologically, the Brusker Rav came before Rav Soloveitchik, but the Brusker Rav understands this similar to the Brusker Rav. The Brusker Rav, in his written up shiurim, he describes two different rayas, two different proofs as to how we know that this is true, how we know that the Nanuum, that the shaking of the Lulav, is certainly a very important component of fulfilling the mitzvah of Netzilas Lulav, of being Mekayim this mitzvah de'oraisa. So if you look at the Gemara, the next Gemara in source 5, the Gemara says as follows: Tan Rabbanan, Katan hayodei ala na'aneya chayiv b'lulav. When a Katan understands, when a Katan knows how to shake the Lulav, he's chayiv b'lulav. Lis atif chayiv b'tzitzis. When he knows how to wrap himself in tzitzis, he's chayav in tzitzis. Then the Gemara continues, Lishmor tefillin, aviv lokeach lo tefillin, right? We know that the Gemara talks about that one has to have a guf naki, one has to be shomer his guf naki in order to be mekayim the mitzvah of tefillin. So therefore, a son only begins to put on tefillin when he's able to do that, when he's reached an age of chinuch in which that's able to happen. And then the Gemara goes on, Yodei l'daver aviv lomdo Torah u'kriyas shema. And when a child knows how to, is understanding, then a father continues to teach his son kriyas shema and how to ultimately learn Torah. So a very interesting diuk the Brusker Rav makes from here. He says as follows. He says, by the mitzvah of tzitzis, when is one mekayim the mitzvah of tzitzis? When does one start being mechanech his child, start educating his child within the mitzvah of tzitzis? So the Brusker Rav writes, right when the child is able to be misatif himself, when the child is able to wrap himself up, that's when he's able to be ultimately take on this mitzvah doraisa of wearing tzitzis. And then we see by tefillin that one is only able to be mekayim the mitzvah of tefillin when when he has a guf naki, when his body is clean and when he's ready. And then by lulav, what does the Brisa say? When he knows how to shake the lulav, that's when he's mekayim the mitzvah. But didn't we have a Gemara that in Sukkah Membeis that said, Midag be nafak be? What's the point of the Nanuum? Why does one have to pick up the Lulav? So the Brusker Rav learns out from here that Kidei l'na'aneya, that we only are mechanech our children to take the Lulav at the time that they are able to shake it, because shaking is a component, is an ikr mitzvah, is part of the entire whole really of the mitzvah of Lulav. So that's the first raya that the Brusker Rav brings, that this Gemara teaches us that Kidei l'na'aneya, the only time the son is originally going to be mekayim the mitzvah, is ra'oi even to be mekayim the mitzvah, is when he knows how to shake the lulav, and that is the beginning threshold of when a father is supposed to begin to teach him. So therefore, the Nanuum are an important aspect of this mitzvah. That's the first raya of the Brusker Rav. So the Brusker Rav is obviously on the side of not only midag ben afak bey, rather the Brusker Rav is on the side of one has to know the Nanuum as well. Okay, great. That's the first raya. Here we go. Now we have a second raya. So the Gemara, the second raya in the source 5a, the Brusker Rav brings the raya from the lighting of the Hanukkah candles. So the Ramah writes in Hilchas Hanukkah Siman Taf Reish Ayin Hey Ulididan, that every single person in a house has to light Hanukkah candles for themselves. And then the Shulchan Aruch writes, Katan shehigia lechinuch tzarich lahad legamkin, that a Katan, when he arrives at the age of chinuch, when he arrives at this level of understanding, of knowing how to light Neiros Hanukkah, so that Katan now is obligated to light Hanukkah candles. And the Mishnah Berurah writes on that Ramah, venerally, it seems to me, the pshat is, that a katan only has to light one candle ner echad for all of the days, and therefore we understand from here that there is no there is no chiyuv really for the katan to do anything to have anything to do with hidur mitzvah, because we know that there's a concept from this Shulchan Aruch that there's no concept of hidur mitzvah by chinuch, that only when a child is able to know the entire mitzvah and is only able to be mekayim mitzvah d'oraisa in its fullest sense are we required to then be mechanech our children. So therefore, when the Shulchan Aruch writes that a child is not doesn't need to light Hanukkah candles on the level of Mahadrin, Mina Mahadrin, we learn out that a child does not necessarily need to do the main component of the mitzvah, and therefore we know that we can apply from here that with regard to Lulav, that the Nanuum is part of the Iker mitzvah, because the Nanuum, when the katan is chayav l'na'aneya, as the Gemara says, so that shows us that the katan now is required to do the Nanuum, and the Nanuum play a crucial role in the mitzvah of Lulav. So the Brusker Rav says from here again that this idea of chinuch and katan, that when a katan kidei l'na'aneya, when a katan understands, knows how to shake the Lulav, that's when he is chayiv in the mitzvah of Lulav. Now we're going to go weiter into the next raya. So the Gemara says, Lulav sheyesh bo shlosha tfachim kidei l'na'aneya bo kosher. So the Gemara says that the Lulav has to have a certain amount of Lulav to it. It has to have 3 tfachim to it in order that kidei l'na'aneya bo, because otherwise we're not going to be mekayim the mitzvah of Nanuum. We're not going to be mekayim the mitzvah of shaking the Lulav. And the Brusker Rav says from here as well that if the Nanuum are not there, if we're not able to be na'aneya bo with the Lulav, that the Lulav is not going to be a kosher Lulav. And therefore, once again, the Brusker Rav sees from here that the Nanuum are part of the Iker mitzvah, that the mitzvah is not just a basic level of mida'ag be'nafak be, a basic level of just picking up the Lulav. Rather, the Lulav is the main component of the mitzvah of Lulav here, according to the Brusker Rav, is that of the Nanuum, is that of shaking the Lulav as well. Okay, so now we have once again a deeper understanding. Let's just sum up to where we are right now. So we have once again a machlokes whether or not what the main component of the mitzvah is. Is it mida'ag be'nafak be? Is it does the mitzvah of Lulav start when the time you pick up the Lulav, like we saw from the Gemara in Ta'ab Bidvar Mitzvah? Or are we going to say that the Nanuum are an Iker component, that the Nanuum, the shaking of the Lulav, like the Rambam, like the Brusker Rav, are a crucial understanding, are a crucial part of the mitzvah of Lulav? And we saw the 2 rayas, the 2 proofs over here from the Brusker Rav as to how the Nanuum certainly play a large role in the how to play a large role in the Iker mitzvah of Lulav. So now we see in the it's brought down Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank, who was the chief rabbi of Yerushalayim until 1960, has a very fascinating idea with regard to this as well. If you look back at source 1, the first pasuk that we quoted, "Ulekachtem lachem bayom harishon pri tzadar kapos tamarim v'anaf eitz avos v'arvei nachal u'smachtem l'fnei Hashem Elokechem shivas yom." So the pasuk says ulekachtem. Now ulekachtem means when you take that lulav, and the Gemara learns out from that pasuk that where's the mitzvah d'oraisa? The mitzvah d'oraisa is only really the first day. We know that the mitzvah of lulav, you have to have your own lulav specifically for the first day, and after the first day, one can then use the lulav of his friend. However, ulekachtem lachem bayom harishon is telling us that the first day of Sukkos is the mitzvah d'oraisa, is the mitzvah to take the lulav, and that's the first day b'gvulin. That's the first day outside of the Beis Hamikdash. However, for days 2 through 7, the pasuk says usmachtem lefnei Hashem Elokechem, seemingly in regards to the mitzvah that occurs, the mitzvah that is upon us for taking the lulav for all 7 days in the Beis Hamikdash. So we see usmachtem means something greater. It's not just ulekachtem, right? The simchas hamitzvah that comes out through the Nanuum, the simchas hamitzvah that comes out through shaking the lulav. You know, I'm sure all of you love to play games or do whatever you do with your the lulav shaking. It's an enjoyable thing. It brings out an emotion of simchas hamitzvah that really exists within the mitzvah. That really the mitzvah of lulav is supposed to evoke in each and every one of us. And when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, so we took on that as well. Once we took on that we were going to take the lulav for 7 days, so we took on the fact that we were going to do the Nanuum for 7 days as well. Usmachtem lefnei Hashem Elokechem shivas yomim. that we're going to be Mesameach before Hashem Elokechem for 7 days in the Beis HaMikdash. And now as well, even though we don't have a Beis HaMikdash, we have beautiful city of Yerushalayim behind me, but fortunately we don't have a Beis HaMikdash. It should be built here, B'Yameinu. But we certainly have the mitzvah of taking the Lulav for 7 days, nowadays. So there are many nafkaminas, there are many questions that hinge on this debate about whether or not the mitzvah is only mid'ag bein afakbei, the mitzvah is only a din in likicha, the mitzvah is only a din in picking up the lulav, and once you pick up the lulav, you are mekayim the mitzvah, or is the din in the Nanuum, is the din, does one need to shake the lulav to be mekayim this mitzvah in its fullest sense? So the first idea that I want to discuss briefly is that of when we make the bracha. So we know that there's a concept in halacha, certainly by birchos HaMitzvah, that we make the brachos on any birchos HaMitzvah, whether it's putting on your tefillin, whether it's putting on your tzitzis, regardless of what the birchos HaMitzvah is, we make the bracha in a form, in an aspect called over la'asiyasan, before we do the mitzvah. So we take the tefillin, right, we put them on our arms, and right before we're about to wrap the tefillin, we make the bracha, and boom, right away, we then start to tie the tefillin on our arms. So we have this concept of over la'asiyasan, and that comes obviously to exclude two different aspects, whether that's the aspect of after we do the mitzvah, that's achar la'asiyasan. Once we do the mitzvah already, there's no point of making the bracha, and what we call over to over, when we make the bracha too far in advance for to be mekayim this mitzvah. So when it comes to taking the lulav, so what are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to make the bracha when the lulav and esrog are still in the bag? What are the different aspects? What are the different options that we have in front of us to be mekayim the mitzvah in its fullest sense of the word? So let's try to understand this. So if we're going to say, so Tosfos over here, as you can see quoted on the bottom of source 1 and source 7 on page 1, Tosfos gives 4 different understandings as to how one can be mekayim this mitzvah in its fullest sense, in the sense of over la'asiyasan, in the sense of taking on the mitzvah before we do it. So Tosfos says as follows. Tosfos' first understanding is that you take most of the meaning, you pick up most of the arba minim, and you leave the esrog on the table because you haven't been yotzi. You haven't been yotzi the mitzvah. In order that you're not yotzi the mitzvah yet. So you put the you pick up the lulav and the other 2 minim that come with the lulav. You leave the esrog on the table, and you make the bracha, and right away, immediately, you then pick up the esrog. So if you look at the Tosfos over there, Tosfos in source 1 on page 2, really it's source 7, the first idea in source 7. Tosfos says in the first line, Mitamzet tzarich levarich al lulav kodem sheyati lenu de'il achar shenati lenu de'il achar shenatlu mid'ag bein afakbei. Right, you can't say the mitzvah, you can't say the bracha after you've already picked up the lulav, because you're already mekayim the mitzvah, you already picked up the lulav. So how is it possible now to be mekayim the mitzvah, to say the bracha rather, if you've already been mekayim the mitzvah? So the last line of Tosfos, Tosfos gives his understanding. The last line, the bolded words say, "V'shema mishayachya lito lulav kodem sheito la'esrog mevarich." That you make the bracha on the lulav and esrog before you pick up the esrog, and you leave the esrog on the table, and then you make the bracha on the tilas lulav, and then you pick up the esrog, and you're mekayim the mitzvah. However, before we get to however, actually, the Sfardim even paskin like this. This is what those of you that are Sfardim that paskin like the Shulchan Aruch are probably do in your understanding of the mitzvah. So the Shulchan Aruch writes in source 7, Yivarech al netilas lulav shechiyanu kodem sheyitol etrog kedei sheyivarech over la'asiyaso. So he says that's exactly the Psach Halacha. That's exactly what you're supposed to do. Before you pick up the esrog, you're supposed to make the bracha. Okay, good. That's our first understanding. Tosfos understands this mitzvah that you have to do this in order to be mekayim the mitzvah, in order to make the bracha in its best possible way. Tosfos then actually, not unfortunately, but Tosfos brings another suggestion as well as to what is the best way to be mekayim the mitzvah. Now, whenever one is involved in learning, when Tosfos brings 2 explanations, 2 understandings for something, right, we have to ask the obvious question: why was Tosfos not okay with this first answer? What was wrong with the first answer that Tosfos gave? So let's discuss the second answer.